I didn't stop praying. I didn't lose faith. I didn't give up on God. I just stopped asking. No requests, no lists, no quiet begging disguised as hope. For 7 days I spoke to God without asking Him to fix anything, change anything, or give me anything. At first it felt like a small decision, almost meaningless. But I didn't realize then that this simple pause would reveal how much of my prayer life was driven by fear rather than trust. The first time I sat down to pray without asking, my mind immediately resisted. My thoughts rushed in with reminders of everything unfinished, everything uncertain, everything I normally place at God's feet and walk away from. I noticed how automatic my asking had become, how quickly prayer turned into problem management. Sitting in silence felt wrong, almost irresponsible, as if not asking meant I wasn't doing my part. That discomfort was my first warning that I had confused control with faith. In those early moments, silence felt heavy. I kept thinking, if I'm not asking God to intervene, what am I even doing here? That question exposed something painful. I had trained myself to believe that prayer only mattered if something changed afterward. I didn't know how to just be with God without expecting movement. Without requests, prayer felt empty, and that emptiness scared me more than unanswered prayers ever did. The first 2 days were restless. My body was present, but my mind kept drifting toward worry. I caught myself wanting to break the rule just to feel relief. Asking had become a release valve, a way to unload anxiety without actually understanding it. Without that release, everything I had been avoiding started rising to the surface. I realized how often I use prayer to escape discomfort instead of allowing God to meet me inside it. As the days passed, the noise didn't fade, it intensified. Thoughts I had buried under repeated prayers demanded attention. Old fears resurfaced. Doubts I thought were gone returned quietly. Normally, I would ask God to take these thoughts away. This time I didn't. I sat with them. And in that stillness, I began to understand that God was not distant. He was watching me learn how to be honest. There was something humbling about not asking. It stripped away spiritual performance. I wasn't trying to sound faithful. I wasn't searching for the right words. I wasn't explaining myself. I was just there. And in that presence, I noticed how much of my prayer life had been about convincing myself that everything would be okay rather than trusting God, even if it wasn't. Around the middle of the week, something subtle changed. The urgency softened. The constant mental pressure to fix everything eased. I didn't feel sudden joy or dramatic peace. What I felt was steadiness, a quiet acceptance that I didn't need answers right now. That realization alone felt like relief. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my faith by outcomes. I started to see that asking, while powerful, can sometimes become a way to rush God. We say we trust Him, but we keep repeating the same requests because silence makes us nervous. We think faith means persistence, but sometimes faith means patience. Sometimes it means sitting with God and admitting that we don't know what to do next, and that we're okay with not knowing yet. By day 5, prayer felt different. It was slower, softer, less structured. I wasn't trying to guide the conversation. I wasn't steering it toward solutions. I was simply acknowledging God's presence. And in that quiet acknowledgement, I felt something deeper than reassurance. I felt grounded, not because my problems disappeared, but because they no longer defined the moment. I began to understand that trust grows when we stop demanding proof, when we stop asking God to explain Himself, when we stop needing immediate clarity. Faith matures in silence, not because silence gives answers, but because it teaches surrender. I wasn't being ignored. I was being trained to rest. On the 6th day, I noticed how much lighter my heart felt. The weight I usually carried into prayer wasn't there. I hadn't solved anything, yet something inside me had shifted. I realized how exhausting it is to constantly bring God a list instead of bringing Him yourself. When you stop asking, you start listening, not always for words, but for awareness. The 7th day was the hardest and the most revealing. I wanted to ask again. I wanted reassurance that I was on the right path, that things would work out, that my silence hadn't been pointless. The desire to ask exposed how deeply I craved certainty. Instead of giving in, I said something simple. I told God that He already knows what I need, and I meant it. In that moment, I understood that prayer doesn't move God closer to us. Prayer makes us aware that He was already close. God doesn't need detailed explanations. He doesn't need reminders. What He desires is trust without conditions, presence without pressure, relationship without transaction. Those 7 days taught me something I didn't expect. Prayer isn't about control. It's not about managing fear. It's not about forcing peace into existence. Prayer is about alignment. And sometimes alignment happens not when we speak more, but when we finally stop trying to steer the outcome. If you've been praying constantly but still feel restless, maybe it's not because your faith is weak. Maybe it's because your heart is tired. Maybe God isn't asking you to say more. Maybe He's inviting you to rest, to breathe, to sit with Him without expectations. Sometimes the most powerful prayer is silence. Not because silence is empty, but because it makes room for trust. And trust, when it grows quietly, changes everything, even when nothing around you changes at all.